We're joined today by Rohan Nadkarni of Sports Illustrated to talk about his cover story on Heat superstar Jimmy Butler, his pursuits on and off the court, and to preview the upcoming season. All that and more on today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg. Joining me as always is David Ramil and special guest from Sports Illustrated, Rohan Nadkarni. However, you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app. Thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. We are joined by Rohan Nadkarni of Sports Illustrated, who wrote a cover story about Jimmy Butler this week called "There's No One Quite Like Jimmy Butler." Thanks so much for jumping on the show, man. I want to get to some of the quotes from Jimmy and from Pat Riley in a second, but I just sort of want to start with the reporting on this story. Butler and Riley aren't exactly guys known for doing exclusive interviews. What was it like reporting on this and talking with them ahead of the season?
Pretty fun. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty cool. Jimmy's always really fun to talk to if and when he's willing to chat. Like he's always on. He's a very funny guy. Like they obviously both have a lot of interesting things to say about basketball. Pat Riley was telling me all kinds of stories that were really interesting. So it was truly a privilege to get to speak with both of them. They're both very interesting, even for very different reasons.
What was the best Riley story?
Oh, yeah.
More like he would reference like things like he's like telling a story about Jimmy, and he's like, that reminds me when Michael Thompson walked into my office in '86. Like I'm like, and it's like it's not a bit, like he's being serious.
Right.
Stuff like that is pretty wild.
Well, just even from the perspective of like trying to pitch the story to get Jimmy involved in the process, how did that come about, and what was that like?
Wow, I mean, those are the kinds of things that you really are working on for years in some ways. Just
Sure.
I wrote about Jimmy once before, and I think that story went well, and so that kind of like plants the seed, so to speak.
Sure.
And I think at SI, like, I think last year we had the Celtics on our cover. Like, when the Heat lost in the finals in 2020, we had them coming out of the bubble, with a big story in there too. So it's like a combination of, the Heat obviously had this exciting run and Jimmy was at the center of that versus, we'd been lucky to write about him before. And sometimes all those things come together at the right time.
What does it mean for him to be the guest editor of your season preview?
So we basically tried to get Jimmy in the issue in as many ways possible besides just writing a story about him. So there's, he has, like, he tells us his favorite coffee places in NBA cities in the issue. There's a story about his friendship with Carlos Alcaraz in the issue. There's like, we asked him a bunch of rapid fire questions like which rookie should we look after this season, which coach, and so there's a bunch of little blurbs about that. Another thing that's in the issue, which is another reason why I hope people really pick it up, is
when you say pick up a physical copy.
Yes,
is what you mean.
yes.
Go to a newsstand or something, or wherever
Right.
it is that you purchase Sports Illustrated. Yeah,
a bookstore even.
Wow, those still exist?
Yeah. We had a bunch of like anonymous scouting reports that we get every year, and so Jimmy reacted to a bunch of them, which was pretty fun, and that's all in the issue. So I hope people go pick it up.
I'm gonna go pick it up. I think is that Borders on University still open? I don't remember.
I was gonna say I think if you try Barnes and Noble, you might actually have some left.
All right. I want to just read you a couple of things that really stood out to me from your own story, which is always weird when people read you things that you wrote, but I love this, and it's such a great point. Quote, Butler has few friends around the NBA and is basically never seen hanging with them off the court or palling around on their podcasts. First of all, great phrasing about the palling around on podcast, because that's literally what those podcasts, those player hosted podcasts feel like, which is great, but that's exactly what it is. Why do you think that is? Why did you feel the need to include that kind of detail in the story here?
I think just because it's one of those small things that I think the totality of what Jimmy does is what sets him apart. But that's one of those small things where it feels like he's always going against the grain. He's always challenging things, whether that means like things people say to him or the way his peers act. Right? I feel like he's kind of committed to going against the grain, and it's just like you mentioned, like we see all this. More than ever, right? Like one of the criticisms about the NBA is these guys are too close, too like it's a weird thing that people always want to talk about. Like, are these guys friends off the court? I'm cool with it. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but in a time where like that's a thing people worry about, Jimmy couldn't be more further removed from it.
And you got like fake beefs like between like Klay Thompson and Paul George that like nobody really cares about, and they used to be friends and now they're not friends anymore. It's a little soap opera-esque, and yet Jimmy doesn't really include himself in that. And he finds, I guess, joy with you go on to mention some of the people that he hangs out with, right? And he's able to just kind of find friends off the court like Jay Balvin, which is really cool. But I do wonder where that, I guess, just comes from. It's not like he comes from an area that's not known for basketball players. You know what I mean? Like Texas has a bunch of guys that have come out and played in the NBA. So I guess I'm just curious about that entire thing. And you go on and you say, you to go back to your point about the totality of Jimmy Butler. Here's another bit in case you're not uncomfortable enough listening to me read your writing. Butler's ability to look at what's directly in front of him and not dwell on the past is one of his defining characteristics. It's common for NBA players of Butler's stature to mythologize the summer of despair after a difficult playoff defeat. You'll often hear stories of superstars going into a dark place, replaying critical moments in their mind and growing a castaway-esque beard as they ruminate on their near misses. I love this for two reasons. Number one, you're 100% right, and over the next month or two, we're going to read a ton of stories about how this was the biggest summer of this player's career and how they're going to come back better than ever and how last year didn't end the right way or how they wanted to. And it's a cliche story, right? It's such a cliche story. And I'm kind of sick of reading them, if I'm being honest. The second part about this is that Jimmy Butler is just not a cliche. In all of these things that we're talking about, he's just like the opposite of a cliche superstar player. And I do think, and I want your opinion on this, I think people have a hard time digesting that, relating to it, rooting for it even, maybe. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I do think it's interesting. I think, you have to hit a sweet spot, right? Because I think people start to like guys when they act different, but they want to know they care about certain things as much as fans may care about it, etc. I'm with you. I mean, I think it's I the way I look at it is I just think if I were famous or if other people were famous, they should try to do it in the way Jimmy Butler does it, right? I think he's just really enjoying himself. I think he's reached a point in his life where he realizes he can enjoy himself and wants to take advantage of all these experiences that he has available to him. And I think that's really cool. I think more people should capitalize on things like that when they have the chance. And I think that's what makes Jimmy unique, right? It's like, a few days after the finals, he was in Brazil. And he manages to do those things without caring any less or trying any less hard when he's on the court. And I think that's what makes him a very unique individual.
But were you surprised to even hear him say that? Because we all know about what an intense competitor he is. And so you just would think that naturally that would still bother him. And maybe he's just kind of being a little bit performative when he's answering these questions, although I don't get that sense from the tone of the interview. But you would still think that it would still drive him or egg him on, or just even kind of hurt a little bit. But he just kind of makes it seem like he's very capable of compartmentalizing the pain or whatever you might want to call it of losing in the finals, and then just being able to say, you know what, that's in the past. I can move on now and look forward to the future. Were you surprised by his answer?
I would say that I wasn't surprised by his answer. I was surprised that was the impression I kind of had going in, just from seeing what he was up to this summer already, and
right.
And so
he didn't look depressed when he's on the U.S. Open. He didn't look sad when he's got that big smile and he's walking out to the tennis court or anything like that.
Right, but it's funny because I asked him and Pat Riley about something that Riley said at his kind of exit interview press conference that he gives at the end of every year, he was like, Jimmy's the kind of guy that doesn't need a pat on the back. That he referenced Michael Thompson when he told me that story. That's when he said, like, Michael Thompson came to my office and said, I don't need a pat on the back, coach. And he was like, Jimmy reminds me of that. And I asked Jimmy about that. I was like, Pat's so famous for the way he motivates people.
Right.
But it sounds like he doesn't need to say anything to you. Like, and where does that come from? And Jimmy was like, I know why I do it. He's like, I'm too old for, these kinds of things to hype me up. Man, I look at kind of, the loss the same way. I think the things that drive him, the motivation that he has at this point, a tough finals loss is not going to change what that motivation is, to change where that drive comes from. And I thought that was the point that he was trying to make.
I want to explore that relationship between Pat Riley and Jimmy Butler a little bit more, because I think that's fascinating, but we're going to do that after this.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's just $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. And if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So go visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. That's FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. We will be back on Monday talking about Miami's preseason games over the weekend, Friday night in San Antonio, Memphis on Sunday night. Make sure you are subscribed. Not that anybody's playing in that Spurs game.
Right. It hardly qualifies as a Heat game.
It's more like a summer league game in October. All right, I want to keep talking about that relationship, Rohan, between Jimmy Butler and Pat Riley, because it's so interesting, because it does feel like they're cut from the same cloth, and yet we don't really hear them other than that annual press conference that Pat Riley gives that you referenced. We don't really hear about that relationship all that much. And I promise this is the last time I'm going to read from your article. When we signed him in 2019, it was the right time for him and the right time for us. We're about winning, and Jimmy's about wanting to win. It's why Miami feels that a third title run is a possibility, even as the team lost Max Strus and point guard Gabe Vincent in free agency. There's a couple different things in there, but why is it that you feel like Jimmy is the right fit for somebody like Pat Riley at this stage of Pat Riley's career? And why do you write that they feel like they could, like, a third title run is a possibility right now?
So in terms of his fit with the Heat, I asked Jimmy, I was like, why do you think it's worked so well for you here compared to other places in your career? Like the success you've had the last few years. He mentioned a big part of it was just the hierarchy, everyone knowing their roles. And he's like, I'm not going to say whose role is what. You could probably guess what they are, but people here know their roles, are committed to it. Spo gets the best out of everyone. And I think that's something that definitely appeals to Jimmy, right? Is the fact that people can speak freely. That environment, it's the lines are clear, I think, in Miami in ways that maybe they aren't necessarily in other organizations. I'm not saying that's better or worse, but just clearly, like, they seem to operate a unique way, at least in their minds. So I just think that, and I think what Riley said is true. It's like they both have, I think, a similar kind of intensity, motivational level about trying to win that's very outward. I think other organizations and players have it, but I think, Riley and guys like Jimmy express it the same way. And I think that's what I think has made the partnership work so well so far.
And you've gotten the sense that they think that they can get back to the finals this year.
I think that I definitely think that the Holiday and Lillard trades. I mean, I spoke to, these interviews were done before those trades happened, to be totally transparent.
Gotcha.
And So I'm not saying that that's changed the belief level. I think they realized that the climb is going to be harder than it was a couple weeks ago, but I didn't get the sense from anyone I spoke to that this is going to be a gap year. This is there's none of that, like accepting that they've taken a step back despite what happened this offseason. I think that the confidence is just as high as it's been at any point.
I wanted to get back to the Riley situation. Again, we were
Mhm.
talking about it before and how, Jimmy kind of compartmentalizes and moves on and things of that sort. But, Pat Riley, so famous for that quote of there's misery and then there's winning and then there's misery. And yet for Jimmy, he doesn't seem to kind of want to, just sit in that misery and is able to move on. Don't you think
winning
that
and there's not winning for Jimmy?
Right.
Guess.
Yeah. Don't you think that would create some kind of conflict, or not necessarily conflict? Because I guess they don't really doubt his commitment to winning, but you talked about the fit, you wrote about the fit, and yet maybe he is a little incongruous with the whole idea that, it's either a championship or bust in Miami.
Yeah, I don't think that Riley's motivation or that obsession has changed at all.
Right.
I do think that something that's happened is Riley is not. Spo gets a lot of leeway, and I think Riley understands that this is a different generation, right? Like and I was speaking to him about what Butler does off the court. I think Pat gets a kick out of it, but I
Oh,
think he
really?
also recognizes that it's different from the players he coached to an extent, and I think that's why he lets kind of Spo be that manager more so than he is at this point in his career. And I think that you've seen the Heat now from the time that LeBron got there. I think realized that they have to kind of create a more mutual relationship with their stars to an
Yep.
extent.
Yep.
So those things have changed. Like those stances have softened, and in that way, like I said, I still think Pat is all winning or misery, but he recognizes that things have changed in how players are going to express themselves.
Yeah, he goes to a dark place so Jimmy doesn't have to, basically, right?
Exactly.
Do you still
Well,
get that sense, Rohan, that it is winning or misery for Pat Riley? Because we're going to get to all this stuff, but like opportunities to trade for Damian Lillard, opportunities perhaps for Drew Holiday, and it doesn't. If there is an urgency, I don't know that Heat fans feel that the organization is acting with an appropriate level of urgency.
That's true. And we can get into some of the transaction stuff like you said, and I asked Riley about that, and we can go over those quotes which didn't make it into the story, but I just think that's a separate conversation. I mean, that's complicated for a variety of reasons. We have the new CBA now, so I understand like the frustration when the moves of the Lillard and Holiday magnitudes were made this summer, but I don't think that has anything to do with Riley's motivation to win.
I've got, before we get into the transaction stuff, because I'm sure a lot of our fans want to hear it. I'm just curious because he basically flat out says he's not friends with a lot of NBA players, and that seems so atypical of NBA stars and how fans want to perceive them. Do you think that makes Jimmy someone that other players around the league may not want to play with? And do you think he kind of gets a little bit of a pass for not being the kind of idealized recruiter that a lot of people want out of their superstars? Because I remember years ago, Derrick Rose got that kind of flack for not wanting to woo Carmelo Anthony. It's happened before. And I think internally we all view Bam as that next guy, the one that players around the league want to play with. Does that make Jimmy kind of standoffish or just unique and it doesn't really matter around the league as much?
I don't get the sense that it matters around the league. I think Jimmy, even the players who find him annoying, I think would tell you they respect him. I think he's really well respected. And I think that what he's done on the court, right? Like we all know, taking an 8 seed to the finals, taking a 5 seed to the finals. I think that stuff at this point weighs more on people who are considering coming to Miami, where they feel like they'd have a great chance to win with Jimmy. I think that matters more. And I think even if he's not particularly friendly with a lot of guys around the league, he's definitely got a lot of respect.
Let's talk about this Heat season, how the Heat stack up against the Celtics and the Bucks in the East, and if they can return to the NBA Finals, and if they can, how they can do it. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Heat. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. Before we do talk about the East, Rohan, you mentioned a couple of the quotes that didn't make your story. You have a favorite quote, a favorite anecdote, a favorite story, a favorite anything that was on the cutting room floor?
I asked Pat Riley if he's tried Jimmy's coffee yet, and he said no, but he did try the Van Leeuwen Big Face ice cream flavor while they were in Milwaukee, which I thought was funny. He said he got it in an ice cream cone.
What
Really
flavor?
wanted to get that in there. The Jimmy Butler's got a Big Face coffee flavor.
Oh, it's the coffee flavor ice cream.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
got it.
Yeah.
Got it in a cone?
Yeah.
Kind of hard to picture Pat Riley eating a cone of ice cream, though, right?
Yeah,
Like,
I know.
like...
Yeah.
What an image.
Yeah. That didn't make it in there. I asked Pat.
Do you think Pat Riley is like a lick or a bite on the cone? Because you can lick the ice cream cone, or you could just bite right into the ice cream. If you have sensitive teeth, it could be a little troublesome. But I do wonder if he's a lick or a bite.
I'll let you ask that, Wes, next time you get
in June. I'll ask him.
Yeah,
I'll ask him in June for his next annual press conference.
Availability. I don't know.
Pat Riley, are you a licker or a biter?
A year ago, you had ice cream, according to that side reporter, Rohan Nadkarni. We want to know exactly how you
did you bite. Go ahead, Ron. I'm sorry.
No, that was a really enjoyable detour that we took there. No, that was mostly it. I think we can bring up the Riley quotes in context of where we talk about next, but that was honestly probably the most fun thing that we left out.
Well, what do you think we're going to talk about next?
What do I think we're going to talk about? I'm confident I'll be able to work it into the conversation.
Okay. All right. Well, we haven't really talked with you at all since the Damian Lillard saga in general. Just what were your thoughts on how all that went down? And do you think personally that there's a chance of the Heat making it back to the finals now that obviously Lillard is in Milwaukee instead of Miami, and then the fallout from that, Drew Holiday getting to Boston?
Yeah, I mean the Dame stuff, pretty wild. I mean, it was definitely shocking. I do think ultimately a lot of it came down to the Heat. If they had great pieces to offer, things people were really excited about, like one young player who is basically slightly better than Hero at the end of the day, even like the best Hero projection, I think.
Sure.
If Miami needs someone slightly more tantalizing than that for whatever reason, and maybe they would have been in better position to make that deal. I do think for the Heat. So I asked Pat, I was like, do you feel pressure to add someone around Jimmy? You know, one of the things he said was, when you make one of these big moves now, you got to hit on it. You got to hit. And I do think that the second apron has been a concern for the Heat. I mean, it's not a surprise when you look at the moves they made this summer, letting Gabe and Max walk, salary dumping Oladipo, only really replacing them with a minimum guys. I think they've been cost cutting this summer. It's no secret they're right under the second apron. I think that is kind of something that's been looming over them in terms of how they work on the roster.
And obviously that comes into play when you talk about Bradley Beal reporting that they didn't pursue Bradley Beal, not just because of the contract, but also because he wouldn't waive the no trade clause, which went with him to Phoenix. And I guess the Suns were fine with it, because if Bradley Beal comes over with a no trade clause and you find yourself in a place where you need to get out of that second luxury tax apron or something like that, it obviously becomes much more complicated when you can veto any type of trade away from Miami. And so I do wonder how the Heat can look around and say, okay, yeah, we're dealing with the second tax apron. Obviously, some of that has to come from ownership, right? Like, it's not Pat Riley paying for this team. Obviously, he's got a great relationship with Mick Garrison, and they have been in lockstep now for almost 30 years. But the Carnival Cruise Lines is the jersey patch. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know that this is a team that's flush with cash the way that even a team like the Knicks or the Lakers or the Warriors or the Celtics are at this point. And is that getting in the way now of this team being able to maximize the Jimmy Butler window when you have teams like Milwaukee, And Boston obviously motivated enough to say, you know what, let's just go for it and go ahead and grab Damian Lillard, go ahead and grab Drew Holiday, where Miami just wasn't able to do it. Not just this summer, but even last summer, where they weren't able to make a trade for Donovan Mitchell or Kevin Durant. Are they almost fantasizing this thing where it's like, all right, you know what, we have enough, and at the end of the day, they're just not going to have enough.
Well, I do think that the irony of it all is they have a pretty big tax bill this year, right? It's the first time they're paying the tax in a while, and they're going to be paying quite a bit of it. They just got hit with the second apron thing, and I think we're going to find out pretty quickly this year in the NBA that unless you're the Warriors, who are kind of almost grandfathered into the system because they had Steph Clay and Dre on the team already, if the team's willing to pay in the second apron, if that's the right strategy or not. If Boston is going to be too top heavy, if Phoenix is going to be too top heavy, Milwaukee, I think teams want to see how that plays out a little bit. I think teams are still trying to understand the consequences of what does it mean if we don't have our taxpayer mid-level. What does it mean when we can't sign buyout guys in the season that made a certain amount of money on their last contract? So I think once teams kind of figure out those consequences, we'll know whether the second apron is creating kind of a haves and have not situation, or if you're in Miami and you finally have your limits, so to speak, you can still compete that way. And I think the Heat to some degree are still finding that out themselves. As far as the championship contender thing, I think it's no secret they've taken a hit with what happens with the Bucks and Celtics. But again, I think they're A, wanting to see what happens with these teams that are top heavy. B, I think even though they've obviously struck out on some big names, I think they probably still feel like they have moves to make on the board before, by the deadline at the latest.
Yeah, that sounds a little surprising because I don't know. They did. Wes and I have talked about it before, and it just doesn't seem like the Heat has operated like that for a while. I mean, the last real midseason trade that they did was to acquire Andre Iguodala and Jay Crowder right before the season ended in 2020. So I don't know if there's another move to be made. And we've talked about Kyle Lowry, and I think a lot of people still expect Lowry to be moved, but I personally believe that might be a little too optimistic. I don't know that there's going to be as many takers, and I don't know what you're going to be able to trade Lowry for, or who you're going to have to attach along with Lowry, whether it's a pick or other players, in order to get the complementary piece that could get them there.
Yeah, I definitely think it's easier said than done.
Sure.
You do think even last year, you think about where someone like Russell Westbrook was by the deadline. People were talking about, is he even going to play in the NBA again after this trade, et cetera. He had a bigger contract than Kyle Lowry. He got moved along with the protected first, and the Lakers were able to get valuable players back in that deal. It comes down to, are the Heat willing to attach an unprotected first to Lowry? Are they willing to attach Jovic? If that's the case, I think that contract will be attractive to teams around the league and movable. And again, that's all easier said than done, but it's a possibility and still possible for them to stay under the second apron in a scenario like that.
Should they trade for James Harden?
Ooh.
I don't think they should trade for James Harden. I don't think that's the move. I think you let him go out west. I do think they should be calling the Pistons every day and trying to get Monte Morris and Bogdanovich together.
Okay.
That sucks. That's so lame. Like,
why?
Milwaukee just got Damian Lillard, Boston got Drew Holiday, and we're like, well, we've got Monte Morris.
I would pick the Heat to make the finals if they got Monte Morris and Bogdanovich together in that deal. Throw Jovic in there too.
Ooh.
Throw Jovic in the deal, sending Jovic out for Bojan Bogdanovich and Monte Morris.
Yeah.
Is Monte Morris the starting point guard on this team in that deal?
No.
Those are two 39% career 3-point shooters that would actually be the best shooting lineup the Heat have ever put around Jimmy. Bogdanovich averaged 20 last year. He was good
on a bad team.
Yeah, he got a lot of opportunities on a bad team.
He's a good player. No, I don't want to dismiss Bogdanovich. He's a good player.
He was like 48, 39, and 88.
What does that deal
incredible.
Look like?
That's incredible.
Is it just Kyle Lowry contract wise that you need in that?
You could fit it for Lowry's contract, but I'd throw Jovic in if I had to.
And a first?
Yeah.
Wow.
Send it in.
That's the part that I I don't know
That
how much
team would
longer
be
I want to go
good.
on this, but look, that would be an improvement. But that's the thing that this team is not doing, is making those marginal improvements, because they're hoarding whatever picks that they have in hopes of landing a superstar player. And then these superstar players come along and then they say, well, actually, no, because we don't want the long-term contract or the no trade clause or anything like that. So I just sort of wonder, like, that's why I keep going back to Harden. It's like, well, here's your superstar player, and you don't deal with the long-term contract because his deal's expiring. But then they're like, well, the off-the-court issues. And I'm like, well, then what do you want? What are you looking for if you're the Miami Heat? Because you don't want to make the marginal moves because you want a superstar. You don't want the superstars because their contracts are too big and you're worried about the second apron. And then you have a superstar that's on a 1-year deal, and you're like, well, no, because we don't like his personality. To me, this is a Heat team that's looking for this perfect fit over the last few years, and it's just not going to happen. And that's why I question this team's urgency and even, honestly, kind of real self-belief. If you give a truth serum to this team, you get Pat Riley drunk and really ask him, do you think that this team would have made the finals, was going to make the finals last year, and do you think that they could really make it again? I wonder if they would say yes, because they're not acting like a team that would say yes. And that's just where I keep coming back down on this.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I do think, again, if you look at the superstar stuff on a case-by-case basis, I think that a big part of it now is, I floated out Embiid before as someone who they might want. Like Lillard, I think him being, if he was 2 years younger, I think you would have seen them make a more aggressive pursuit with Portland. Embiid is now pushing 30, but I think they'd rather trade for a 31-year-old version of him than a 33-year-old version of Lillard if all things were created equal. Now, that's not necessarily the case, and they might not get that opportunity, et cetera. So people don't need to get carried away with that. But I can understand each time why they didn't make the move, why it didn't happen. And like the way the Portland stuff unfolded this summer, could you really say that's a fault of the Heat's urgency? Maybe. I don't know. There's a lot of reporting.
Yeah, there's a lot. Like
it's fair.
It's fair. I don't mean to
right
debate Miami's urgency in getting Damian Lillard. They misplayed their hand.
Well, even yesterday, right? The report that Aaron Goodwin said something that pissed off Joe Cronin
or radio hosting stuff. Yeah, I don't know.
That he was this close to sending Damian Lillard. It's like, okay, like that's something that a lot of Heat fans need to hear, especially when they've kind of sort of moved on and are looking forward to Miami's young core.
Well, let's just end it here. I don't know. Do you want to do predictions, or you could just say I don't even want to bother? Get me off the show.
Okay. What are we predicting?
Top 6 in the East.
Yes.
You'll do it?
I'll do it. I'm coming back around to this team. I still think that the Jovic conversation got way too out of hand.
In what sense?
People are expecting him to play way more than I think he's actually going to play.
Okay. But you like the team. Why do you like the team?
It's more so that I don't love the East. Like Toronto's worse. Chicago could be good, but they could trade anyone in any second. I guess the Pacers will be better.
Yeah.
But the Hawks might be slightly better, but they also don't have John Collins anymore. So I don't know. Like it's more so with the distrust in the Heat, or distrust in the East rather. But
give me your final rankings. Top 6. Just, you don't have to give me all 15. But all right, Milwaukee or Boston, who do you think is better?
I'll take Milwaukee for now, then Boston.
All right.
Then Philly.
Yeah.
Then Cleveland, then New York, then Miami.
These are regular season standings.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. And then in the playoffs, do you like Miami's chances, or what are we talking about here in terms of the Heat's actual realistic ceiling?
As presently constructed, don't love their chances, but I'm willing to give them until the trade deadline to see what they do with this roster.
Fair enough. This is a team that's $13 million over the luxury tax, so getting below the luxury tax really isn't an option for them. So it's either make a move at the deadline or don't, and see what happens, I guess. But Rohan, this was such a joy to bring you back on. It's been too long since we've had you on the show. If you have not read his piece in Sports Illustrated, go check it out. Find a bookstore or a place that sells magazines. Jimmy Butler's on the cover, and there's a really cool photo shoot that goes along with it. With some of those shots were done in Miami, right? Some of those.
That's right. Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Definitely worth checking that out and grabbing a copy. So thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube and follow us on your podcast app.